So good morning. I wanted to talk a little bit today about extreme hallucinations and just my experience with them and how they weren't the end all be all at the end of the day. Though I did end up needing psychiatric help for a short, limited amount of time to get through them, but I thought the content of my hallucinations was relevant or interesting for some reason, and it's the kind of thing that I'd like to illustrate since I do art and make art. I can think of like a number of artists who've said the contents of their paintings or artworks was really inspired by their dreams or their hallucinations or things they saw on psychedelics or things that were brought to their mind's eye by psychedelic trips or at the depths of its psychosis from like schizophrenic trips, since like that's really potent material. It can extend past like your basic shadowy abstract figures. That was probably something easy or something a lot of us might have experienced, but they weren't so solidified that they could hold a greater impact. You sort of knew the back of my mind, your back of your mind, you hadn't been sleeping. At least that was the case for me. The first time I saw anything in the corners of my eyes that was like that, it was shadowy figures, and I had not slept at all for 2 days. 2 nights I hadn't slept, and I was just a little more like tweaky when I went to school the next day. I thought I saw shadowy figures, but that didn't really scare me. In fact, it kind of thrilled me a little bit, because I was like, oh, there's your proof that if you don't sleep enough, your mind will start to play more tricks on you, most probably. So that's like the earliest experience like from when I was becoming an adult, or like close to adulthood. Of course, like a lot of kids have vivid imaginative ability, like can hold imaginary friends really well until it sort of fizzles out, and maybe for some people they never bring it back, or it never comes back. Maybe they have no interest in it. So to me, those are very light compared to what I experienced a couple of years ago, pretty much all in 1 month. A very chaotic time for me, and I ended up being hospitalized in a county mental health ward during that time. And it was not the first time I've been hospitalized in county mental health wards, upwards of 12 times on involuntary holds by now. So I have a really extensive history with the psychiatric and the psychological community, or institution, not really community, and I really need a place to like offload about what I've experienced, because I've seen a lot of things in there, and I've seen a lot of tricks that doctors use, or like I've seen a lot of things that they do to patients, and sometimes doesn't seem very ethical, or sometimes it's weird. And the point is, I've had a long history with this. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder. I've been diagnosed with drug-induced psychosis, and then I walked away with these disorders also on my name. And like I've seen so many things in there, but today I wanted to talk about this one period of my life, probably about a month to 2 months, 1.5 months long, though it really felt like an eternity. And during that time, I experienced the most frightening sensations and hallucinations I thought I'd ever experienced in my life. And luckily, that is as bad as it could get in terms of what I could do to myself internally. So maybe I could talk about this real quick as like a bridge before I go deeper. I think maybe there are 2 points of extremity in terms of how far out you can go. There's also how far in you can go. So I'm really using like a Jungian world model. I really do use Jung a lot. Carl Jung, the psychologist who wrote several treatises, and he was vaguely spiritual. He wrote about dreams and things like this, which was unusual for like psychologists and head doctors that were in his peer group. So it's a very Jungian model, this idea of the inner and the outer, and then that's it. I very associate the symbol of a circle with a dot in the center. He used that in his writings. I've seen it in his writings, and it represents like your inner psyche, and then your outer consciousness, or a sun. It's also like a sun or a light, the dot, and it's in the middle of a circle. Really simple symbol. So that's a really Jungian concept, that a person must go from their youth to exploring the external social reality, and that's the whole basis of how they determine what they're going to do with their life, or how they're going to have a model for their reality. They start off very sheltered or very within a small set of rules and natural rules, their own small area, their family and their town. And then they must firstly progress through their town and learn what their own history is about, what their own life is made of, built of, what the people they were taught by were teaching them. And then they go all outward. They leave their town, they leave their home central circuit, and discover what is external, what is out there, what is in the wilderness, what's in the world, right? You don't start off in the world. You start off in a small enclave, and you must first learn what's in your enclave so that you can open the doors and go into the world and not get immediately eaten by greater wolves or something, right? Because you can't do that. If you haven't thoroughly explored your roots, you're going to be rootless and not capable of building something or entering something in the world, the greater. So in Jung, there is this idea that there's the internal exploration, which is like the early half of your childhood odyssey towards adulthood. And then there's the external circle, which is the exploration outwards. And now you're returning to society at large to see how you can give back. At first you were being given, and now you're giving back. So I think that explains it in short. That's a lot of Jungian ideology, the way I partake of it. That's a pretty good way to get started with him. So I think that's really relevant, because this 1 month I wanted to talk about is not the first time I'd experienced an extremely harrowing set of psychotic experience, or what I perceived to be psychotic at the time. Maybe in a different world I would have been able to conceptualize it in a different way, but we're beyond that. So this was what I consider the second period of that growth. And like, don't get it confused that like it has to be completely matching to the terms. The point is that there was two of these extremely psychotic experiences in my head. I have at least 2 memories of times that were the most difficult in my life. That's what I'm trying to say. But the second one was towards the later end of my becoming an adulthood, and that was actually the one where I had to face my inward side more. So like maybe these circles are, spheres within spheres, that they don't literally match up to the terms. So I'm actually going to briefly mention the first period the first period of hallucinations and or difficulty dealing with life, I was living on my own for the first time, and it was not a good neighborhood, and I definitely didn't respond to it well. After a certain point, I was fine for several months. I lived there on my own, maybe 6 months, and eventually I started to have a mental breakdown, and I didn't have a scaffolding net. I didn't have people I trusted nearby. I didn't have anything that I thought I could rely on to help me get to just lean against while I got through this muck part of life. And that's what ends up being this breakdown, this mental breakdown ends up being something really simple. But since we're not taught much about it, or, since we're not really taught how to deal with crisis, it can seem like something that's really bizarre and strange. So in the first time, I was a younger person, so I was moving through, I was moving out of my home for the first time. So that was like the first layer, but I didn't have the extreme hallucinations I did on this second trial. So it's like what I'm trying to say in this video is that there's 2 trials, and I started off, I only wanted to talk about the second trial, but I'm just wanting it to be clear that there was also a first trial, and the second trial is very different. And that's why I'm bringing up young. The first trial was very much situated in the time that I moved out from my parents and like college roommates and friends for the first time. And I did have a mental breakdown, and I would kept going outside the house and going very, very far from home. I would be 20 miles from home, and I'd have to get back home by the bus to a dangerous part of town, and I would have gone out and had a horrible day and just been completely paranoid and having all sorts of paranoid feelings and thoughts that like people are looking at me. People are saying extremely harsh things about me, and in reality, nobody was paying any attention to me. So that was the first trial, the first of these very dark periods I had. So I guess I was going to only talk about the second one, but I'm going to talk about both in this video. The first very dark period I had, both of these times, any of my mental breakdowns, I've always had extremely harsh voices talking to me very negatively commenting upon me, negatively commenting upon the environment, being very distrustful. Secondly, I would always be a little bit in a state of disarray. Like nobody ever gets up, puts on their makeup, does their hair until they look cute, and then goes out to have a psychotic breakdown in the middle of a park somewhere miles from home, and you don't have a car or anything. Nobody does that. So that's always a feature, is that you've stopped taking care of these like basic things, right? Like you've stopped taking care of the things that helped you get out of bed or helped you face the day. Even if it was something really like silly, like you like to wear a different nose ring every day or something. When you stopped doing those things was how you started slipping, and it's a really slippery slope, especially if you're like already in a stressful time due to work or school or whatever you're working on. That's how you know you're slipping. So the first trial, so we're talking first trial versus second trial, I would go out and I basically was terrified and confused and didn't know how to progress, and I would start wandering and feeling extremely judged, and I'd never felt more terrified outside as I had in my life. And okay, I ended up hospitalized a few weeks after that one as well. But the second time, and this was closer to like becoming more situated in what I was doing for my career and stuff, and just like accepting everything that it comes with, because everything you choose, any career you choose has baggage that comes with it. You'll have to accept. The second trial was a different one. It was one where I was truly facing myself. See, I had thought to myself that I was facing myself in the last one, because it was the most harrowing experience I'd ever experienced. And when you experience something harrowing, you tend to think, oh, you're facing yourself. Oh, now he has to face himself. She has to face herself. But it wasn't quite that. That was me facing the world and my family. That was me facing my family, all of whom live within me. And that was me facing that. But the second trial, I had to face being alone and actually be in the dark with myself alone. And that's how I started experiencing really strange reality. I'm going to talk about that in a second video because this video is getting kind of long, so there's a part 2.